That's cool. Yeah,
And I'll
somebody
probably
on
buy
the
it.
Oh yes, 100%. Somebody on the video that we posted had said that they were surprised it wasn't boysenberry flavor or boysenberry scented, and I was like, that is genius. Like that must be on its way, right?
Probably, yeah.
But yeah, it was something to walk into the marketplace or to walk into the berry like and just see like little baskets of the hand sanitizer. So it was $2.50 for a little bottle of it.
So we are live, and so we'll get started in just a minute if you're just joining us. We're just chatting and catching up a bit. But yeah, we'll give everybody a minute or so to log
Posting
in.
it on social now. And then we will get started here.
Cool.
All right. It is on social now, so we're good there. So people are starting to join us. I see in the chat coming in. Thank you guys for being with us here. Hey, Tim Fowler here, the farm. Hey, guys. Hey, Tim. It's always neat seeing people jumping in here. So I think we can go ahead and start with our intro. Is that okay?
Sure. Go for it.
Okay. All right. So if you are jumping in on the chat here, if you're watching with us on YouTube live or just YouTube later, this is a live show. Obviously, we do every Thursday night currently, but it also serves as an audio podcast. So we will be making its way over to Apple Podcast, Stitcher, and all of that stuff. So I'm about to read the intro here, but feel free to jump in the chat as we go along. There is a little bit of a lag time, about 30 seconds. So just be aware of that. But we'll try to get questions out there to Ted as they're applicable to the things being talked about. And also, if you are in the live chat, feel free to talk amongst yourselves as well. Obviously, feel free to chat along and we'll just keep an eye out for questions there. Hey, Ray joining us. Almost forgot today was Thursday. Got to get back to Scary Farm Thursdays. Hey, and AJ, hello. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start the intro so we can get going here. Welcome to Parks and Cons, the companion podcast to the parksandcons.com website and YouTube channel, where we discuss cons, theme parks, collecting, and other fun stuff. It's May 21st, 2020. I'm your host, Sean. I'm here with Carmel.
Hi there.
And Ted.
Hello. Parks
and Cons, your on-the-spot podcast where we take you to the heart of the action, best conventions and themed entertainment events around. Today, we are back to travel in time with our friend Ted, back to the ghost town streets for part 3 of what has been an epic few weeks here as he's shared all sorts of amazing pictures, stories, history. It's been a real educational thing, and it's really some of my favorite stuff that that we've done as Parks and Cons literally the whole year or many years. So thank you again, Ted, for being here again to do one of these shows, which I know isn't easy to put together on your end, but we do really appreciate it.
Well, listen, it's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here with you guys and share these stories and this fun information about this event that we really dig. So I'm super stoked to be here.
Yes.
Well, by the way, Elaine Dominguez says, "Hey, Ted washed his face." I love it. So
I did. Hi, Elaine.
Okay, real quick before we get to the meat of the show, a real quick dose of hope to start the show off, as we've been doing the last few months here of just little things we find on the internet of things to look forward to down the line. And today, I think last week we talked about new comics coming out. Today, I thought it was very cool to see some of the small businesses that I know Carmel and I really love supporting down in San Diego County area, like Southern California Comics, for example. They have gotten the go-ahead from the state and the county to open up with limited access in the store. So as of Saturday, you can go inside a store. You have to wear masks, of course, and social distancing, and it's very limited of how many people can be in the store. But as whether you're a fan of obviously all the people with us, Halloween events, theme parks, and for myself also comic books, there's just something about being able to walk in the door. So very excited that they get to be open and that they've made it through this crisis. And there's a bunch of comic shops down there that will be opening, but particularly Southern California Comics has always been really good to us. And it was exciting to see their post today with it was a real long list of rules of how it's going to work, but it was exciting to see those rules. So that's our little dose of hope to see some of these small businesses come back and particularly wanted to shout out Southern California Comics down in the San Diego area. And so with that, we come back though to the main topic here. Is Ted, you've been with us now. This is week 9 of this marathon journey. Are you holding up okay?
I'm holding up okay. Yes.
We did want to announce tonight, and we'll talk more about as we go along a little bit, maybe at the end or something like that. But for our season 1, next week will be our season 1 finale. So we kind of had talked about from the outset, and we're going to kind of leave it a little mysterious of exactly what we're going to talk about next week. But it's something Ted and Carmel and I have been talking about for many, many weeks. And I know Carmel and I are really excited about next week. But we have a little season 1 finale. We also have some ideas for season 2 stuff. There's some things we definitely would like to get on video and record and podcast, and we'll see where that fits in. But we thought it'd be a good time to take a little pause, kind of meet behind the scenes, talk more about the future. But hopefully by the end, we'll have maybe 17 hours of Ted talking all sorts of Scary Farm history, which is crazy. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is like by far the most you've ever been like on the record of thoughts about Scary Farm on a video type thing, right? Or a podcast type thing.
Yeah. By far for sure. But I was just trying to think about other things, that I've spoken at, like other conventions and things talked about Knott's Scary Farm's history. But usually those things just last, half hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour sort of lecture or something like that. Not 17 friggin' hours combined of all of this stuff.
Well, I mean,
we'll get awesome.
more. Yeah, we'll get more into it next week and stuff too. But that is, to me, that's been a really cool thing throughout this, is to have, all of these thoughts in your head somewhere now recorded, where we always have them to come back to. Because as fans of your work, before we ever started doing this show, it's just neat to me as a fan to be able to go back and say, okay, let me watch part 1 of Ted's, talking about Ghost Town and things like that. And obviously we've had Eric Linksweiler on a show, which has been great, and Jonathan Green. And so I'm really excited we can be capturing some of you theme park and haunt geniuses to talk about things, and we can kind of refer back to them. But again, huge thanks to you for that. And then huge thanks to you for, I know what you're going to give us tonight. So real quick, and I would imagine at episode 9, everybody that's watching pretty much knows, I would think, who we are and who you are, Ted. It's at this point, it's like Lost. We're near the season finale. So you've either followed along or you're totally confused by what's going on. But just in case we have somebody that's brand new, mind introducing yourself and giving a little bit of context?
Sure. I am a writer, producer, and director for the themed entertainment space, with an emphasis on immersive and horror types of experiences. Worked with all kinds of different theme parks and different companies, but mainly for this show's purposes, my roots are at Knott's Scary Farm. Worked with them over the years in many different capacities, and wrote a book about the history of Knott's Scary Farm. And so that's kind of what we're sharing on these episodes, is either expanding on things that were outlined in the book, or sharing some things that didn't quite make it in.
Yeah. And Carmel and I, cover a ton of haunt stuff, Halloween stuff, and Scary Farm really is the heart for both of us of Halloween stuff. And we won a contest to see Ted's walk in the park. When it wasn't called that, but at Knott's Scary Farm, he did a walk in Ghost Town and gave us a tour, which was fantastic. And that's part of where the idea of kind of these few episodes came from, is if there was a way to capture some of that, because we do have video of you actually walking us around for that, but you've gone to such crazy levels of depth, and all these pictures that you're showing and stuff. Carmel and I were talking about that, of like how fun it was this week. We were talking about how fun it was walking with you in Ghost Town, because there is something very special about being in there and you touching the walls and things like that. But at the same time, there's something really special about being here and having you show us these pictures and share these things, because the visuals you've supplied the last couple of weeks have been, I know at least to Carmel and I, have been really jaw-dropping. So thank you for putting all the work into all of that.
Well, thank you guys again. I mean, it's great that we've been able to team up for all of this, and you guys hosting all of this, and being able to present it to folks. And I kind of agree. When we were doing the walking tours at Knott's Scary Farm, we really kind of thought about different ideas on how to share some of these photographs that were lining up with the locations that we were at. And
Yeah.
so the best I could do was basically have either Rochelle, my wife, or a close friend or two, or whoever, basically be kind of hanging out with me and sharing like printed photos like that we put up in a binder to show what some of this stuff really looked like back then. So maybe there's probably definitely, I'm sure there's better ways to do that, but it's fun. I mean, especially again, we've talked a lot about it, but I mean, the purpose for these presentations here is an escape and sort of that taking a break from things, and I think the photos really kind of help enhance that and really kind of hopefully in your imagine take you to those spots.
Totally. And real quick, I want to say hi to Michael jumping in the chat, says hi to everybody, says, wouldn't it be great to enjoy the Knott's chicken dinner and boysenberry pie during a podcast? And AJ, grateful for it. Thank you, JJ. We're grateful for having you. Tim, it's the only thing I look forward to during the week. Well, we thank you very much, Tim. And we always look forward to seeing you here. And we look forward to seeing whatever you do at the farm as we get to that spooky season. So
yeah, and for those of you in the chat, we very much appreciate again,
yes,
you all being here. It gives us something to look forward to, having the interactions. Although obviously we're not speaking with you directly, but seeing that you're there and commenting and stuff is awesome. So thank you for joining us, especially those of you who have been here most of, if not all of the weeks. Has been really cool to see familiar face, or not face, some faces, because some of you have your avatars there, but your names and stuff. It's been great that you've joined us, so thank you. And for those of you listening to the podcast, we appreciate you listening too, but obviously we don't see you live, so we can't thank you by name, but but we do appreciate you listening as well.
Definitely.
But real quick, regarding the people that are part of the chat, I don't have access to be able to see who's in the chat, and so Carmel and Sean have done a great job at kind of throwing out the different names of all the folks who are either asking questions or saying hi and stuff. So for everybody, even if they're named or not or whatever, tuning into this at whatever capacity, but especially the chat, it feels like, hey, you know what, we're all in this together at that particular moment, enjoying these stories.
Yeah, very well said. And BV Hunter has joined us. Thanks for doing these videos. Thank you for being here, BV Hunter. All right, Ted, should we turn it over to you to start walking us around again?
Yeah, so we're going to try to this. I mean, I get nervous at this point of the show because I've got to share my screen. And so if I lose you guys, I'll call you back, or we'll reconnect. And I mentioned this before too. As soon as I'm sharing my screen, I can hear Sean and Carmel, but I can no longer see you guys. And so if there's any questions that come up or anything along the way, just interrupt me, stop me, tell me to shut up, so that way we could communicate with each other. And again, I will do the best that I can to try to describe what we're looking at. Yes. So that way, for the people that are just kind of listening to this, can kind of visualize along with us. So I'm going to go ahead and try this.
Go for it.
You guys ready?
Yep. And while you do that, hello, Jojo and House Savan. Hello. He says, I've been here mostly quiet because I'm in awe. Last week's walk was a top moment this year. That's very kind. And thank you. Adam Walsh, hello. The show gets my Halloween heart pumping. I started work on my yard display. That is fantastic. Thank you, Adam. We look forward to seeing that hopefully this year.
Have you guys seen it? Can you guys see my screen?
Yep, yes. A walk in the park ghost town.
All right, well, here we go. And I know I've said this in the past, but again, maybe somebody stumbles upon this particular episode and maybe they're starting with this. So just sort of kind of reminding people that in case you've missed any of the past episodes, this event of Knott's Scary Farm has really changed and really kind of matured and grown over the years. So like the last couple of weeks, I'm going to focus on just a couple of specific locations within Ghost Town, and we'll kind of virtually walk around and discuss. And I also stayed within a very old decade because most folks listening and tuning in are familiar with what the event is like now. So we're going to transport way back in time to the first decade that Knott's Scary Farm existed, and when it was a nice, cute little baby and figuring itself out. So we'll walk through some of these early years of Ghost Town. And as I've mentioned before, the very early Scary Farm maps, the park event maps, were a little difficult to follow. So to make things a little bit easier and to kind of find our bearings, I have this portion of a souvenir wall map that I'm sharing here. And this is drawn in the late 70s. By an amazing artist named Bob Bates. He did a ton of artwork for Knott's during this era, like the attraction posters, like the log ride, the mine ride, soapbox racers, parachutes, all that kind of stuff, and the menus, and this great wall map. And it is not a Knott's Scary Farm map, but this will be a little bit easier, I think, for people that are kind of looking over. We're looking at kind of at this bird's eye view of the Ghost Town area during the 1970s. And I know I've mentioned this before, but I think it's worth repeating that when we're allowed to go visit Virginia's gift shop again at Knott's Berry Farm, take a walk into the back part of the shop, and you will see this map as a full-size wall mural, and you can really kind of see all of the great details that Bob Bates drew into this thing. So anyways, last week we left off at the original hangings from the 1970s in Calico Square, and we kind of followed along the area of Schoolhouse Road. And this time around, we're gonna stay right near the schoolhouse and make our way into the area of the Birdcage Theater. And so here's a close-up of that area, how it looked around that time. And we see there on the upper left of this photo of we see the actual schoolhouse and the bonnet shop across the road. Grandma Bott's Bonnets, and that's where the Haunt Museum was housed, which we talked about in the past. And across from the Birdcage Theater is like a log cabin that it was later moved, but that is now the barbecue restaurant area there. And I have here a photo from our friends at West Coaster that kind of shows the Birdcage sort of nowadays. And it's on the outside, the exterior. And, just as a quick side note, people may not know, but this is a replica of the original Birdcage Theater out in Tombstone, Arizona. And apparently Walter Knott wanted to relocate the original, but when he couldn't do that because it's a landmark over there, he recreated the front facade here, very much the way he sort of recreated Independence Hall across the street. But anyways, this is just the front facade of the Birdcage Theater that's recreated. And here's an old photograph from several decades ago of the Birdcage Theater. This is like the 50s, 60s, somewhere around there. And it's the same angle. We're looking at the front of the Birdcage Theater. And in this photo, we've got the melodrama actors and the cast hanging around outside. But if we're facing the Birdcage, either nowadays or decades ago, there is one item that has been outside and to the right of the building for years. And it sits kind of right between the Birdcage Theater and the schoolhouse. It's very, very old. It's over 100 years old, and it's the Calliope. And believe it or not, back in the early days of the Scary Farm, they actually used the Calliope a little bit, as we could see in this next photograph. And in this photo here, this is from 1979 Scary Farm. And really taking a look at this photo, who best to play some scary music for a scary event than Miss Piggy from the Muppets. She's dressed in like an Old West dress and sporting this amazing Miss Piggy mask. And these
Wow.
were certainly in the days that Knotts could get a mask at like a local warehouse or a Halloween shop and not really worry about intellectual property infringement as much, right?
Mhm.
But kind of making our way inside the Birdcage Theater. We've got a couple photos here, and you know, in the early years, the theater troupe was owned and operated by a guy named George Stewart, another person, Woody Wilson, and eventually George took it over entirely and handed over to Knotts altogether in the 1990s. So they took care of everything in-house for a very long time. And so the same thing would kind of happen for Knott's Scary Farm. The Birdcage troupe just took care of what they would do for the event themselves. So we're looking at a couple of photos, more of a modern photo of the interior of the Birdcage seating and the stage and all that. And we're also looking at a group of folks dressed in gorilla costumes surrounding a skeleton. And this is from a Scary Farm show in 1979 named The Wedding. And I say it like that because there is a question mark at the end of Wedding. And this was inside the Birdcage, and it was described as a horrific matrimonial chiller. And it was really just a spin-off of one of the melodrama shows. But the following year, in 1980, was the first time that a longtime Scary Farm staple made its debut. And we'll pull up a couple of photos right now. So we're looking at two photographs, and this show starred a character named Dr. Cleaver. And one picture is inside the Birdcage with a creepy hunchback character next to a guillotine, and next to that is the first public appearance of the character named Dr. Cleaver from 1980. In one form or another, really, this character of Dr. Cleaver would be presented at Scary Farm for over 20 seasons. And this second photo we are seeing is when the character actually headlined the entire event in 2004 for Dr. Cleaver's Psycho Circus. And it actually starred the current Knott's Berry Farm VP of Entertainment, Ken Parks. Did you guys ever see any of the old Dr. Cleaver shows throughout the years?
I don't think so. When we were going back before we had the pass, or they offered the pass, we basically were going one night most years, and we were focused on getting the mazes done, and we definitely didn't do any rides, and shows were kind of hit and miss. It was like
Elvira and Ed Alonso were like, if those were like the two targets, if they were there, obviously. And yeah, a lot of the other things were kind of just not on the list really, because we were just rushing through so much.
yes, unfortunately, we missed it.
Well, I mean, it was, you guys have seen shows, the melodrama types of shows in the Birdcage throughout the years, and it's really that kind of fun, old-time cornball kind of comedy. But that character, again, was there for many years as a character, not the actor, but as a character, there longer than Elvira or any other show, really. So
that's something.
Other than maybe Tony Angelo's The Hypnotist. That guy was there for years. Anyways, now we're going to go right back outside of the Birdcage. And we're out there. We're looking at the map again, and we're looking at kind of close up. And I put a little red arrow right in front of what is now, I think, the knife shop.
Yeah.
Okay, right. And then, but it was once the shirt shop and Abigail's Trading Company. And in 1975, Knott's presented a Scary Farm show right in the midway in this very spot. We've got this red arrow right there in the midway. And they built a large stage for it, and it was named The Forest of the Unfortunate. And it was written by former Knott's Entertainment director, Gary Salisbury. And I have a few photos of that show. So we see here in one photo, we see a vampire kind of coming out of a coffin, and he's listening, probably awakened by a trespasser. And we see that trespasser in the second photo, who's wearing like this red flannel and a huge 70s mustache and an old school flashlight. And in that second photo, the vampire's out of the coffin and about to attack this trespasser. And we see the signage of the forest of the unfortunate behind this character. And when I interviewed Gary years ago for my book and stuff, he indicated this was actually written for mimes. And he summarized the show as follows. So he said, the show was about a hunter who stumbles into a forest, and he was followed by a vampire. The vampire attacks the hunter and puts him in a coffin on the stage. The vampire then takes a knife out and starts stabbing the inside of the coffin, apparently killing the hunter. Then the vampire takes out an 8-foot long clear plastic tube and sticks it into the coffin, or seemingly the dead body of the hunter. The vampire starts to suck on the tube, and the guests could see blood coming up from the coffin and into the vampire's mouth. And he was really sucking up berry punch. And so the vampire started kind of walking away, and the hunter, who looked normal before being attacked, opens up the casket, and this horrible monster jumps out. And so again, this was all sort of pantomime, right? And so in this next photo, we could see here, the vampire has been defeated by the help of this undertaker type of ghoul. We also see the hunter now donning like an orange pumpkin skeleton kind of mask, and they're standing over the deceased vampire with a large wooden stake in his chest. And so the show pretty much ended around at this point. And I also threw in a candid photo of the Undertaker character from the show with the original Green Witch of Knott's Scary Farm, portrayed by Diana Kirching Kelly.
Those pictures are great.
How silly is this, you guys?
That's awesome.
Yeah, this is really, really something. I mean, the idea too of fitting a show right there. I mean, obviously at that point in time, it wasn't the taking over, or there wasn't all these different scares and crossbar, but just it's interesting, such a compact little space there to fit a show like this in.
Right, and it is kind of a random spot, but I know that they were just looking for sort of this open midway area. That was certainly, they couldn't put it over into Calico Square at that time. And then Gary did go on to say that this show that was moved and modified over the years over to the wagon camp.
Okay.
So they kind of probably realized that, you know what, maybe this particular spot wasn't the most ideal for a large stage. So anyways, we'll continue moving along into Ghost Town, and we're back to our map. And this time we're going down the street just a little bit. And now we are led to the front of the livery stable over to the right-hand side. And I put a little red arrow right in front of it. And, you know, the livery stable, I think is it now the toy barn? Is that what they call it?
Right now it's back to it was that, and then now it's actually the real stable again with
great. Okay.
in there.
Okay, cool. So
now we don't know specifically this exact
Well, not-
minute, but when we were last there, it was
Yes.
a stable.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, so it's at the end of Main Street for anybody who's sort of listening to this and unfamiliar with it. It's over by the windmill and not far where the famous Catawampus stands. But in the early years of Scary Farm, this was actually a fairly important spot. This building housed two mazes, Black Bart's Trail of Terror in 1979 and the Tomb of Terror in 1980. And maybe someday we'll visit those iconic mazes. But for now, we're going to stay out here in the Ghost Town Midway and look at a show that was right here at the end of Main Street in 1978 named Dr. Malodor's Materia Medica Show. And so I'm pulling up a photo here. And this is an interesting photograph that tells us a little bit of information. I mean, this was taken during the daytime, during Knott's Scary Farm. First off, to the left, we see a sign that's hanging up on the windmill pointing us to the Trail of Terror maze that particular season, and that the entrance was over at Boot Hill. And we also see some of the hanging colored scare cloth and some corn stalks and the jute netting. And then we also see this makeshift temporary stage set up for this show. And this show starred this character. And I've pulled up a couple of photos of him. And it's a character named Dr. Malodor and Shigor, who we're seeing in these photographs. And I will read just a brief little excerpt from this original script. And so this is Shigor. Good evening. I am Shigor, close friend and laboratory assistant to Dr. Malodor, the most notorious doctor ever to be expelled from Transylvania University. It seems that even the cadavers were complaining, and one of his professors lost his head and brought charges against him. Then he lost his head again. Pity. But since that grave error, the good doctor has been morbidly engaged in developing the most mysterious, inexplicable, inconceivable, bizarre concoction ever compounded to torment mankind. And then there's a sound of thunder. Oh, but I'm stealing the doctor's thunder. I'll entice him from his crypt and let him dig up the best of the ghastly details, or the rest of the ghastly details, for himself. And so this show would then go on, and he would come out, and all this really was, it was a haunted variation of the old medicine man show that I think Knott still does periodically in some sort of variation to this day. Have you guys ever caught those shows?
Yes, so they did, what was it, maybe 2 years ago, that they did a kind of a version of that as well. But yeah, not obviously exactly this with Dr. Malodor. I mean, I love the name itself, Dr. Malodor. Doris and Shigor. Those are such great names.
Yes. Now, as corny as this show was, along with things like Forest of the Unfortunate, as well as some of those other sideshows that we've talked about in the past couple of weeks, these were examples of what made up the early years of Scary Farm. Now, there is another form of entertainment taking place here in the streets of Ghost Town in these early years of Scary Farm that I wanted to check out. And so I'm going to return to our overhead map of Ghost Town. And that's the way it kind of sat there in the 70s. The big difference, I guess, is the pan for gold on the bottom there. And, you know, a lot of different changes there. But otherwise, the heart of Ghost Town is pretty much similar to what we see nowadays. And a lot of the folks that are tuning into this are probably familiar with a lot of these buildings: the assay office, the post office, the barber, laundry, sheriffs, on and on and on. And we can kind of see those locations in this map. But when we go to Knott's Berry Farm during the rest of the year, outside of October, we can look inside many of those buildings and we see static displays of like recreations of life being lived out in the Old West, and they call them peekins. So I've just pulled up a couple of photos online of the traditional peekins for folks. And we've got the barber shop, we've got Hop Wingley, the laundry. And now recently these buildings really have been rebuilt not too long ago, and actually are emptied for real interior use during Ghost Town Alive. You can go into these things. But before Ghost Town Alive put live actors inside these peekins, ghouls would sometimes hide inside during the early Scary Farms because they were transformed into startling peekins. And so here is a Scary Farm map from 1980, and these got a little bit better to read. And this is going to be the same overhead view of Ghost Town that we were seeing before. But now it's Scary Farm. And this time around, there are little orange arrows pointing to several different spots throughout Ghost Town. And each of these arrows are pointing to all of the startling pecans present at the event that year. And this particular season, there were 14 startling pecans. That's a lot. And each of them are their own little destination. You guys can see all of them, right?
Oh yeah,
we're looking
and
at
and
it.
that's what I was gonna say is, so I know you told us this when, back when we did the tour and stuff, but it's just something to think about. That, I mean, obviously there's these shows going on in Ghost Town, but there aren't, the wandering monsters at this point. So if for younger people listening, or people that may not be aware of that, at this point in time that you're showing us, the monsters are locked in to their little houses there.
Wrong.
No, oh really?
Yeah, no. So in addition to the pecans, at this point, there are roaming monsters within Ghost Town,
Oh,
as
gotcha.
well
Okay.
as monsters inside the pecans. They did
Gotcha.
both. We'll talk
When-
about that in a second.
Okay, so we don't want to jump ahead. Okay.
Carmel, do
Sorry,
you have a
go
question?
ahead.
Okay,
No,
all right.
I was
Okay.
going to say when, but then you said we'll talk about it in a second. So I'm digressing and letting you do
Yeah,
your thing.
go for it.
Oh, all right. Okay. So, and just real quick, since we're here on this photo, we could see the mazes that year. The Tomb of Terror is inside the livery stable that I mentioned a little bit earlier. And the entrance to Dr. Alucard's Chamber of Horrors is over, the entrance is over at Boot Hill. And so maybe one of these days we can be brave enough to enter those mazes. But for now, we're going to stay out here in the open streets of Ghost Town. But now with these startling pecans, there are a bunch of things going on. And so I pulled up here just online of a photo of good old Mad Eye Joe. Have you guys experienced Mad Eye Joe?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, he's taken over Sad Eye Joe the past couple of years, and he's kind of the closest thing to that Knott's has nowadays to a startling pecan, except the old startling pecans weren't like ultra offensive and bag on the viewers looking inside. So he's got Mad Eye Joe's got quite the cynical sense of humor, but things were a little bit different back then. So we're going to take a look at a couple of them. And so from the get-go, from the very, very beginning, Knott's decorated to some degree the pecans for Scary Farm. This is a really cool photograph that we're looking at from the very first year in 1973, the debut year of Knott's Scary Farm. And a static human prop is wearing an old Don Post Phantom of the Opera mask. And this is a very easy, very simple decoration, but it just added a little bit of entertainment value to the event, I think, when people looked inside these structures. But things would get a little bit more involved in time. The next photos we're looking at here are the startling pecans inside Goldie's. Carmel?
Yes, sir.
For maybe some of your Parks and Cons followers that are unfamiliar with Goldie's, do you want to explain?
Want me to describe it?
Yeah, what kind of business is Goldie's?
I would describe it as an adult type place that one would visit, but it looks friendly enough. It's very welcoming, but there's like red lights in the windows and stuff. And if you are familiar with red light districts, you know what Goldie's is. And if you don't know, then I'm not going to be the one to elaborate. But yeah, it's an adult type place. We'll leave it at that.
Okay, all right. So let's just face the fact here. The happy, family-friendly park of Knott's Berry Farm indeed has a brothel right smack dab in the middle of Ghost Town. And so these two photos display that. The one photo we're looking at is a live actress sitting on Goldie's couch inside, I guess, what would be maybe the waiting room, with two static monsters. Cash is falling out of their pockets. The internal employee description is saying, Frankenstein's monster and the Wolfman offer money to the ladies of the evening. And there's also canned audio playing that guests would hear when they approached the window. So for this particular season, the background song was named I Never Do Anything Twice, which is a nice kind of jazzy, sexy tune from the Sondheim musical. And over the music, there were two women's voices could be heard speaking in low but very kind of discernible tones. And the women are arguing as to whether or not they want to accept the money from these strange and suspicious customers. Then, of course, we have a live character that would pounce at the guests looking through the window. And this is an example sort of that fun that Knotts would have with these startling Pekins. They each told their own little story and were their own little mini destination. And staying within Goldie's, at the other photograph to another year, we see a ripoff of R2-D2, a robot holding some cash and offering it to a static female employee of Goldie's. And again, it's super fun, it's super cheesy, but like many companies at that time, Knott's certainly celebrated the success of the Star Wars film. And even, Wolfman Jack had a lightsaber battle with Darth Vader in the main show around that time. And now we have R2-D2 hanging out in a brothel, and there's a couple of employees, female employees behind R2-D2 kind of holding their hands up like they're not sure about this dude. And I'm not sure, but maybe R2's left hand might be reaching up the leg of that employee of Goldie's. Anyways, moving on to something a little bit more light, into a couple of other Pekins from 1979. So I have an official description of one of the photos that we're looking at. Wing Lee calmly irons the shirt of a man who is still in it, struggling. Now, not pictured here, but also Wing Lee, it goes on to say, eerie eyes peer out from the dark laundry behind a chicken whose neck is caught in the wringer. Audio track includes Wing Lee singing appropriate lyric, the hissing of his iron, and the cackling of the chicken. And in another shot here we're looking at, we have another Pekin. Again, this is from 79 inside the general store. And we see the store clerk with his back to us as he's kind of helping a customer by looking through some merchandise for her. Meanwhile, this female customer has a sickle raised and ready to plummet down onto the back of this unsuspecting poor clerk. Now, again, each of these Pekins did have their stories, their own soundtracks, audio, and some did indeed have live talent lurking inside. And we could see one here inside the blacksmith. And so here we have a photo of like a shrouded ghost town gruesome standing inside the blacksmith. And the description just said, a succulent arm sizzles on a rotisserie over the smith's coals. Now, these photographs that I've been showing were taken with flash photography, so the locations, though, in reality were super dark and really kind of difficult to see inside. So I think it was a little easier for the live actor in there to either work as what we call sometimes a Kodak scare, which is like just standing still like a statue so people can focus on you. And then you just kind of abruptly come to life and pounce toward the guests, or you can come out from like hiding in the shadows altogether and pop, seemingly pop out from nowhere. Now, moving just across the street, we find ourselves over at the sheriff's office. So we've got a couple photos there. And so the mannequins were in these photos are wearing like masks, and they're sitting around the table and playing cards. And the photo here on the left is a little bit more of a close-up of those mannequins and of the table. But in the background, you could see one of those orange and black Halloween flags that we talked about in the last episode with like a skull and crossbones on it. And these flags were placed around the event and used as markers to notify the guests that this location was redecorated for the Halloween event. Now, like I was saying before, all of these photos were taken with flashes on the camera, but the next photo shows how dark the Pekins really could be. So I'm kind of pulling in on this one. And so this is a nice kind of glowing photo of the sheriff's office peak-in, and the internal description reads, "The entire scene is covered in cobwebs. All 4 of the card players are mummified in webbing. A large spider moves toward the onlookers, guarding his dinner. As he does, another prospective victim jumps up from the shadows, screaming at those at the window." It's pretty fun, huh?
That is, it's even all the pictures you've shown to me. These are even more astounding that people took these pictures, because obviously back in those days of like, having to get film developed and all that, it's just so interesting to think of somebody that these pictures survived to somehow get to you to be able to show them to us today.
I know it is pretty crazy when you think about all of that stuff. Now, this specific photograph and this description that I read to you is from 1979. However, in a past season, just before this year, an important event took place here involving an actor, one of the monster talent named Bob Vernon, that really kind of paved the way to the future street monster program at Knott's Scary Farm. That's another story for another day, but I did talk about it during my on-site walking tour that you had mentioned at the top of the show, and you guys filmed that and a few years back whenever that took place. So for anybody who's really interested in more of those types of stories, I recommend kind of searching and finding that out on the Parks and Cons YouTube channel if you haven't checked it out. But these Startling peak-ins in general, and I'm just pulling up another one of some monster talent inside of a Startling peak-in. They were a very prominent feature in the early years of Knott's Scary Farm. They were well decorated, they were well written, they were super fun, and they really added more reason to spend that much more time within the streets of Ghost Town. There was even more character and more spirit and soul in the scare zone than what we see nowadays. And it's crazy nowadays. But in the early years, I mean, they, like we were talking about before, they did have monsters inside. They pulled many out to work into the scare zone, while others stayed for several years inside the buildings to continue to scare people. So they had monsters inside and out. And ultimately, these Startling peak-ins were really phased out by the very beginning of the 1990s. But nonetheless, I mean, they are an important part of Knott's Scary Farm's history. Do you guys agree a little bit?
Oh yeah. I mean, these pictures, I mean, it's just incredible to think of them set that way. And it is interesting that they're not utilized in any sort of way now, in this current era, that they have been prepped, obviously, and they're used for Ghost Town Alive and everything. It would be cool to see them maybe for the 50th anniversary do something with them, at night, and just kind of see it come back to life, even if it was just one or two of them, some beyond Mad Eye Joe, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, the opportunities there, especially since they've sort of recently rebuilt a lot of the structures, so they're a lot more sturdy than they were before. They weren't like super delicate and all this stuff. So who knows, maybe someday they can do that type of thing. And, so I had just, had another photo here of some Ghost Town shots of what it has become and what Knott's Scary Farm has become and what Ghost Town has become. Because listen, well, real quick, before I go on, I had a note to myself that I did want to mention this today. These photos that I've been sharing with you this whole time have not only been, part of my collection, but I've obtained them through either Knott's Berry Farm marketing and several from the Orange County archives. And so for anybody who's really into Knott's Berry Farm history in general and some Knott's Scary Farm history, I recommend checking out the Orange County archives when they're back up and running and all of that stuff, because they're super helpful, super supportive, and really helped me a lot throughout the life of my books. But, real quick, I wanted to say something here just to kind of, as we're kind of wrapping this up a little bit. instead of, we wanted to try with any of these photos and these, talks and all that, was to try to hopefully have the people listening tuning into this, maybe get a little something out of all of this, instead of, because I thought about it, I'm like, well, instead of creating like a silly meme or like a useless video or speculating about like the future or whatever, or more cute pet video photos or whatever, and I do love those, but I wanted to make sure that these presentations, that we left the viewers and the listeners with something that they could take away. And I hope that what you got was a little bit of an education, because no matter how you look at any of this, this is all the very foundation for the Halloween theme park industry. And it doesn't matter if you're Universal Studios, Busch Gardens, Six Flags, Cedar Fair, now even Disney, is doing Halloween events. What we've shared over the past couple of weeks are the absolute roots of all Halloween theme park events. And now that you've followed along with us, you have a little bit better of an understanding of that, hopefully, by now. And so that is our final walk in the park, Not Scary Farms Ghost Town.
Wow.
That's great. Thank you. That is so cool. I mean, and you really hit it on the head. And I know that's something that, even going to my, like my mom being able to experience Scary Farm, part of what was really exciting for her was because we would be there in the daytime and we would talk about just the idea that this is where so much of what we see of Halloween these days across, the country and the globe and everything, like it starts there on these streets, is so like crazy. So real quick, in terms of the actors on the streets in the earliest days there, what would you say then? So I'm conflating things, I think, from when you did do your tour, confusing things. When was what was the, let's say a guesstimate, if it is, of kind of what was with the actors at the very beginning on the streets, really?
Right. And so
Versus
the original
Pekins and stuff.
monsters on the streets were the
Yeah.
stunt personnel who were
Gotcha.
full-time Knott's Berry Farm employees. For the Bob Vernon story that took
Yeah.
place in 77, he was locked out of his Pekin. He was an
That's
employee.
what I was thinking of.
But he was a temporary employee, a seasonal employee, to work just into the Pekin. When he was
Gotcha.
locked out of the Pekin and scared aggressively, management said, oh my gosh, we need to let these people out. And so they started letting the monsters out of the Pekins and scaring aggressively, not necessarily sort of this roaming idea, but scaring aggressively. And so they continued to have monsters inside these Pekins, but they also had other monsters roaming the streets. And so people like, I know like Julie Owens and I think Craig Harold, like other people that I had worked with and worked for when I was there, actually worked as talent in those Pekins.
Wow. Yeah, that was the story. I remember you telling us that story about the idea of the keys and being locked out and the scare. It's just like that blew my mind, that idea of that, such a, you wonder, because if that night didn't happen, when would this have happened? Like where would the story have gone if that one night, that one thing didn't happen, how that changed things. That's incredible.
Who knows? Yeah, it is incredible. I mean, I'm sure Knott's would probably have figured it out one way or another eventually. But I think just the way that it went down and then just saw this lone sort of rogue employee just like really aggressively getting in people's faces and like flooring people was just like that light bulb of like, oh my gosh, people are screaming, but they're laughing. They're really getting into this.
Yeah. And I know you shared this article on Facebook and we had got text us from people, but your friend Margie Kerr, is it? The Dr. Kerr had
Margie.
done. Yeah, Margie had
yeah.
done that. And it just kind of hits at that idea of just the kind of cathartic nature of scaring and the fun of it. And kind of, I thought it reminded me of so much of like why the people I know that only maybe go to one Halloween thing a year, but really love it is because there is that kind of facing your fears, if you will.
It is. And I mean, I think that's probably why I became obsessed with Not Scary Farm and why I end up, writing and working on these events now and stuff like that, because it is about facing the fear. And then also it's about dishing it out too. you know, and scaring people, and so there's that really kind of crazy balance of you know, I've always really felt, you know, the monsters are having just as much fun as the guests are.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, they really are most of the time, you know, and so it's two totally different thrills, but it all kind of comes together in that one moment, in that intense moment, as the guests lock eyes with the characters during that scare.
That's great.
So fun. So maybe we can catch up on some comments that have been made. So Adam commented that he remembers a polka dot room was a peek-in and that he loved it.
Possibly. I know, like toward the end, they got a little bit more wacky with the pecans, and there was, I remember there's like a lot of strobes and all of that stuff too. And I've seen some video footage of some of them as well. But I know they started getting a little bit more aggressive in their scenic. And so I would not be surprised if they did like just a full blown, like, all right, we're going to cover up the walls with, you know, drywall or whatever, or plywood that's painted all polka dots, you know.
I remember being like a freshman in high school, going to this is before I'd ever been to Scary Farm, because we didn't go until right after high school. But going to it was the fireman's haunted house was the big thing in Riverside, and it was the firemen did it for, you know, donations and get it. And they had a polka dot room, which I'm sure they saw somewhere like at Knott's long before there, whatever. And I remember it just blew our minds. Like it was the most progressive, exciting haunt thing like could ever imagine. There was this polka dot room and the two actors just crisscrossed the room right in front of us. And I remember as high school, like freshmen or sophomores or whatever, it just blew our minds of like, oh my God, how did they do this? You know, it's amazing.
Yeah. The first time I ever saw anything like that was in a maze that we've talked about in past episodes named Bates Motel.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this whole crazy black and white checkered room. And it was that whole kind of, but in doing research for the book, that stuff really dates back more to the Campus Life haunted houses back into the like late 60s, before Knott's even Scary Farm.
Wow.
You know, Knott's got it from those guys.
Oh,
so I mean, it's been you know, it's fun to see how haunted attractions have grown. But either way, I mean, a polka dot room is still effective to this day.
It's super fun. Yeah.
Okay. Totally. And then let's see, Botox Rocks commented that I just moved from Colorado to California. Last year was my first Scary Farm. I fell in love. We are making it our yearly thing.
That's awesome.
Great.
Yeah. And then so Ray Agradano, I think is the last name, said welcome to the Scary Farm family to Botox Rocks. So yeah, it's an awesome event, and obviously those of us here love it. So yeah, welcome. Let's see, Tim, this was in reference to when we were talking about Goldie's, said, haha, Leo, which is Tim's son, wants more info on Goldie's. So.
Uh-oh. I think we gave him all the information that we can give today.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
over this recording.
Yeah.
That is on you, Tim.
Yeah.
And during that conversation, Ray commented, wow, so many jokes, must hold back. Yeah, that R2, I was glad that you meant, because I was looking at the picture before you referred to it as a R2 type character, and I was like, that reminds me of like R2D2, and so then when you commented, it validated what I thought I was seeing.
Yes.
AJ commented, R2 goes to Goldie's. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how Baby Yoda came to be. So.
There you go. It dates back to back then, right there in Goldie's.
Totally. Let's see. And then House to Van commented.
Check out Seasons of Scream.
Yes.
Season of Screams, which I know we've referenced before, something that you worked on a while back.
Yeah, a documentary. It's the first full-length documentary on the history of Knott's Scary Farm, and it was sold at the park for several seasons.
That's awesome.
And then let's see, Botox Rocks commented, this is amazing. Jonathan Green commented, can't thank you enough for sharing these stories and photos. This is a highlight of my week.
Oh, well, we feel the same way to Jonathan for his stuff with Universal.
Totally. Let's see, and then Tim put some emojis, I think that mean thankful, and the jack-o'-lantern. So I think he's thankful for the podcast or the video. House to Van agreed. AJ gave applause emojis. House to Van said, thanks, Ted. AJ said, thank you, everyone. Botox Rock said, I want to work at Not So Much. Alan Simpson commented, thank you so much. The history of the event is so important. Obviously, we totally agree with that. Botox Rock says, I'm obsessed. Ruben, I think, was referring to Botox Rocks, to check out the Knott's career website. Make sure you go to auditions to get a good spot. Let's see what else.
I think it's just a lot of conversation amongst themselves. Yeah.
Different, let's see, different scare actors.
Yep. Just people talking amongst themselves.
Thanks.
So, any other questions from the chat before we start to get into the wrap-up mode here? I have one last question for you, Ted, just myself. And so if anybody else does, I was just curious because one of the things we've told Jonathan a lot is he's doing his walk in the parks and just kind of, and even when we just go to, when we've been to the parks in the past and he kind of talks historical and stuff. And obviously it's always because like that's just not like I have my little pinpoints of history that I'll think about, but a lot of it fades away and then I have to be reminded of things and stuff like that. But obviously for somebody like you or Jonathan or Eric Linksweiler, when you're looking at something, it almost seems like you're seeing like an onion where there's like 10 layers deep of like history there and stuff. Is that at all like when you're in, whether it's Knott's in the day or at night, like when you're looking at things, are you kind of thinking of different phases of history? Does that come to mind much? Are there things that come to you that you know maybe everybody else in the group isn't thinking about, but you kind of are reminiscing in your own mind? Or how does that really work when you have so much history kind of jammed in your head for something like this?
Well, speaking for myself, I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, I've hung out with Eric Linksweiler at Knott's plenty of times, and so we don't really go around saying, like, giving each other like our own little tours and tidbits or anything like that. I think we just kind of compartmentalize that whole thing and just kind of put that, like the crazy fun facts off to the side, unless there's something that like sparks and triggers like a memory. I'm like, oh wow, hey, you know what, this reminds me of XYZ. But I think overall, I mean, especially, you know, having spent so much time there and working there and all of that stuff, you know, I think it was more of just sort of this general passion for the event of just and just being there in that moment. So when I'm there in that moment, if I'm not doing tours and all of that stuff is all crammed into my brain, but it's more in kind of in the subconscious that I think helps fuel just that happiness and that joy that I get when I'm being there physically, when I'm physically, you know, right there in the moment. And I think the same goes for really a lot of these types of things. Like when we go to Disneyland, we know all the history. We know a lot of like, okay, you know, here's the Jungle Cruise and this is what it used to look like and all that stuff. And so we've seen little documentaries on it or whatever. But when we're in that moment, that I think is stored away in our subconscious, but it helps us enjoy the moment that much more because we appreciate the history and we appreciate, you know, the piece of art that we're right in front of or engaged with at that moment.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I know definitely when we take, you know, friends that haven't maybe don't have as much experience with whatever Disneyland, and they love hearing the stories too. And that's always kind of really, well, obviously you're doing it here for a much bigger audience, but it is kind of fun to be able to share some of these stories and let other people kind of live them as well. And there's a lot of, I know, joy in that as well.
Yeah. And I just try to make, like, if I'm taking somebody to these places for like the first time, I try not to bore them with like all this stuff. I'll give them the basic fun facts, but unless they're like super interested in it, then I'll tell them more. But otherwise, it's just about being in the moment of enjoying just physically being there and having fun.
Definitely. Okay, we have a couple questions here from Tim Fowler. Totally unrelated, Ted, but what was the first attraction you wrote or produced?
It's, well, I think the first full one that was a little bit more like all in was probably like either something for Universal or like Fear VR. And then before that, it was more sort of broken fragments of some writing and some producing. That's for the Halloween stuff. For the 4D ride and attraction films for themed entertainment and stuff, that goes back to, geez, like many years ago. Like I can like 2006, somewhere around there. And that was more for like theme park attractions.
Okay. This one, Ted, I do not think you can answer, but if you want, I'll say what we have a podcast that comes out tomorrow and we say just this. So I'm going to say that line and then you can say whatever you want, Ted. But Botox Rocks had just asked, do you think Scary Farm will happen this year? What we say on a podcast we recorded yesterday that'll come out tomorrow about current events is people that work on Halloween and build Halloween at all sorts of places are working on Halloween and building Halloween at all sorts of places. There's video of Horror Nights building in the queue over at Waterworld right now. We've seen people hammering away over at the accelerator spot at Knott Scary Farm, but I mean, none of us know what the future holds. So obviously everybody's hoping for the best, but I don't think anybody, I mean, at least my opinion, I don't think anybody knows magically kind of what is going to happen this year in terms of just, you know, from the governor to the federal level to just what happens to the outbreak potential in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, everybody's planning and moving forward as of though it's happening. And obviously, if numbers turn really bad and they're not allowed to happen, they won't. So we don't know for sure. But I think as a general rule from what we're seeing and what we're hearing, and some firsthand, some social media, is they're proceeding as if though it's happening, and hopefully it does. But yeah.
Anything else you want to say on it, Ted?
Well, I mean, I'm just being optimistic and super hopeful. Like you said, there is no, I'm not a fortune teller and a seer, but I am working on Halloween.
Perfect.
Right now, like all week long and all, for quite a while now, I've been working on Halloween. So yes, we're writing it and moving forward as if it's going to be taking place.
Yeah, and obviously they'll be very different, even if regardless of what goes, it will be different in some capacities. But yeah, everybody's, I think, pushing forward and hoping. So.
And you're a busy guy, Ted, so we know you're one of those building Halloween guys. It's always building. Okay, next one. I love this question. It's something I think about a lot. For you, Ted, is there a spot at Knott's that always feels like haunt to you?
And that's from Alan Simpson.
Yeah, for Alan Simpson.
I'm going to say the Silver Dollar Saloon. Okay. That's just right there. No matter what, I can get there and ignore the silly shooting gallery that's in there now. But just being on that porch, being in that area of the Silver Dollar Saloon is one of my happy places. Like that to me is right there in the heart of Ghost Town.
That's awesome. What about for you, Carmel?
I think it kind of depends on time of day or crowd levels, but generally I can be, I think, pretty much anywhere, definitely in Ghost Town. Different other parts of the park, sometimes things will pop in, but kind of anywhere in Ghost Town, given any certain time of day or shadow or something, I can totally feel like I'm at Scary Farm because it's just so iconic. And especially, like on late nights when we're there for like a media event or something and the park's closed and we're able to walk through and it's just quiet. Although obviously Scary Farm isn't usually a quiet place, but it feels creepy and it's eerie. And so, yeah, kind of anywhere in Ghost Town, I can kind of feel that, channel that energy.
Yeah, I love just weekdays walking, weekdays when they close at like 6 p.m. and it's the time of year where it gets dark earlier, and it could just be a regular Wednesday and it feels super creepy because there's like nobody there at 6 p.m. and it's dark. And but definitely for me, I love that we have Boot Hill all year long. I mean, wish Pony Express wasn't soaring above it and the foot went right in there, but still it always is just so cool to me that there's like this very, spooky location that's just there 365 days a year. Anytime you're in the park, you could go in there and feel some of the kind of spirit of Halloween to me. Adam
Yes.
Walsh asked.
Well, I was
I'm
going to say
sorry.
Tim commented Fog Alley, so I
Oh,
think
Fog
that's
Alley,
where
yeah.
he feels
Oh,
like Scary
totally.
Farm.
Mhm,
Definitely.
And then I think our last question, Adam Walsh. Ted, would you ever offer private tours of Knott's?
Like private tours? Well, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we'll be able to arrange some like official tours in the future or something like that.
That would
I
be
think
cool.
that would be cool. I think that would be fun. And, you know, even like think about it, when you guys won that contest and all
Oh,
that
yeah.
stuff. I mean, that was like crazy. Didn't we all meet like by the photo gallery
Yep.
or something like that? That's where we kind of started,
think
and then
so,
I
yeah.
took everybody over across the way, and
Yeah.
that was a different vibe because the park was still open.
Yeah.
And
It was
so
right in the middle of the day.
you know, I'm like trying to shout like over like, you know, loud kids playing around and like the train going off and all that stuff, in contrast to when we've done it for like nighttime media events where it's much more of a controlled environment. But you know, I mean, my thing is this: is if we ever run into folks that have any questions or anything like that, we're at Not Scary Farm and they want to know a fun fact or something like that, I'm happy to share it. But I'm hoping that one day, especially because let me tell you, as just a warning, what we've talked about all this time for like 17 hours or whatever is just the tip of the iceberg.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, for the last 3 weeks, we've talked nothing about beyond Ghost Town. And I didn't even talk about the monsters. I didn't talk about anything of the 1980s or the 1990s. We haven't talked about anything about the old Roaring 20s or Camp Snoopy or Fiesta Village or anything like that. So this is truly just the tip of the iceberg.
Definitely. House to Van said the bench in front of Ghost Town Grill in terms of an always kind of spooky spot. It's a great.
Love it right there.
Yep. Grimwood Hollow, love just waiting at the entrance. Decorated anticipation's always the best.
Sure.
Bella Del Rey says yes to official tours by Ted, 110%.
Del Mar.
Del Mar, I'm sorry, Bella Del Mar. And then Michael Hernandez, we have one more question here, Ted. What would you tell a newcomer so that they can have the best time at Haunt?
Now, Ruben I think, is answering that question and said, Ruben Valencia, don't go on the rides, enjoy mazes and streets and shows. But do you have a comment on that, Ted?
I mean, I kind of agree. I mean, typically, you know, in the past, 2019 and before, I would say go on an off night and get there early, do pre-scare dinner, and focus on all of the mazes, hit all of the mazes first. And then if there's any time left over to hit any of the shows and all that stuff, do it. Obviously, if you can afford getting the fright lane, then absolutely. But otherwise, I mean, I think the pre-scare dinner is, you know, they've got some pretty good bargains and on ticketing for that. And if you can go on a cheaper night, maybe with a coupon or whatever, I think you could get a lot of bang for your buck going on an off night, coupons, and pre-scare dinner.
Yeah, definitely. Tim says go on a Sunday early in the season.
Yeah, definitely earlier in the season
Yes,
going to be a much better option than right up at Halloween.
And we'll see. We've done strategy guides for Scary Farm before and horror nights, and we haven't done it the last, I want to say, 2 years, just honestly because Knott's has done a pretty good job of putting out like tips on their own blog, a lot of the stuff that we've done, but we'll see. And also just we've been really busy, so but we'll see. Maybe we'll do a video this year again and see what happens there. So again, Ted, we want to thank you so much for your time putting that all together and sharing just those incredible pictures and incredible stories. So thank you very, very much on behalf of everybody in the chat and that'll listen to it on the podcast and everything else. Thank you so much.
and thank you guys. And I hope that we've all been able to kind of escape just for a little bit over these few, you know, handful of weeks and think about something that we all dig, like Not Scary Farm. So it's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And again, if you're joining us later on in the show, or just as a reminder, next week we'll be back, same time, same night, for episode 10 of our season 1 here. So we've got a 10 episode first season, just like something on Netflix. And so then we will go to a little bit of a hiatus and kind of think about some things and talk and all sorts of stuff like that. And so please join us if you can, because we should have some fun stuff there. Thanks for everybody that's in the chat. If you're here, we appreciate you. If you're able to like the video, we definitely appreciate that as well. If you're listening in the audio only version, if you're able to join us this Thursday night coming up, that would be awesome to kind of have a send off for this season 1 and kind of all celebrate Halloween on May, whatever it will be that night, as we get ready to go into June, July, and all the rest of things coming up in the near future. So with that, wrapping up the show, if you've not already done so, please check out our Parks and Cons crew. You can find it over on Patreon or our homepage. We put up bonus episodes of stuff there, lots of Halloween talk. Today, we actually had an episode go up over there that just kind of breaks down what was in a recent survey that Cedar Fair and Knott's put out about some of their kind of opening strategy or reopening strategies. And so some interesting questions there if you are interested. Also, if you're listening to us on the podcast, if you are able to give us a review, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever it is you hear the podcast, reviews are always greatly appreciated. You can always follow along with us on social media at Parks and Cons on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and of course, YouTube, where we've got lots of Scary Farm videos from over the years. Wrapping up this walk in the park with Ghost Town with Ted. Until next time, we'll see you in line somewhere.
Night, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
everybody.
Thank
Have a great
you.
week. Thank you. Great week. Great weekend.